As required every 2 years by our Texas Constitution, today I'm delivering the 2024-25 Biennial Revenue Estimate, or BRE, for the 88th Legislature to use in writing the state budget. What a 2 years it has been. The disruption of the pandemic gave way to vigorous economic growth that kept our state in a national leadership role, helped drive record revenue collections, and provided an astonishing projected cash balance, and left us poised to fill Texas' rainy day fund to the brim for the first time since that fund was created 34 years ago. Many positive forces have played a role in creating this growth, including our business-friendly policies, conservative budgeting practices, and ambitious Texans whose vision and hard work benefit our state. Some events, such as spikes in energy prices, are positive for parts of our economy and unwelcome to others. Unfortunately, our record revenues are partly due to the highest rate of general price inflation in 40 years. Besides causing revenues to substantially exceed our expectations, inflation also has driven up the cost of many goods and services. Increases recently have moderated, but many people and businesses still are bending under inflation's weight. Adding to our near-term challenges, we expect a mild recession. The expected downturn for Texas is relatively shallow and short, but it will not make Texans' lives easier. We cannot and will not lose sight of the fact that every tax dollar received by the state is coming out of Texans' pockets. As the 88th Legislature opens its regular session tomorrow, and as I devote the resources of my office to assist in lawmakers' decision-making, we know we have a responsibility to ensure every dime we spend is used wisely and prudently to the benefit of Texans now and in the future. The state will have an estimated $188 billion available for general purpose spending in the 2024-25 biennium, an astonishing 26.3% more than in the current 2-year budget period. These funds include $165.9 billion in general revenue related funds, or GRR. Tax revenues will make up about 89% of the total projected GRR, or $148.2 billion, while non-tax revenues will provide another $17.7 billion. These collections are augmented by an expected 2022-23 ending GRR balance of $32.7 billion. We must reserve $10.2 billion from the 2024-25 oil and natural gas tax collections for transfers to the Economic Stabilization Fund, or the ESF, known as the Rainy Day Fund, and the State Highway Fund. These reserves would be $4.5 billion higher but for the constitutional limit on the ESF balance, which we will begin to meet in 2025. In addition, a little more than $150 million must be set aside to support the state's original prepaid tuition plan, the Texas Tomorrow Fund. Its contracts are constitutionally guaranteed, so the state must make up any shortfall. Besides GRR funds, we are projected the state will receive $108.4 billion in federal money and $68 billion in other revenues. These funds are dedicated for specific purposes and therefore unavailable for general purpose spending. Taking all revenue sources into account, the state is expected to receive $342.3 billion in 2024-25. Focusing on tax revenues, we've almost come to expect records to be broken every month when we report collections, particularly when it comes to the state's sales tax, the workhorse of our tax system. Sales tax currently brings in 58% of the state's GRR tax collections, and its share is expected to rise to 59% in the 2024-25 biennium, when I project it will total $87.9 billion. The BRE forecast all fund sales tax revenue will grow by 7.1% in fiscal 2023, 2.5% in fiscal 2024, and 5.1% in fiscal 2025. These gains are particularly due to continuing price inflation, which will largely make up for slower consumer and business spending that may result from the projected mild recession. As you can see, inflation has played a large role in driving revenues over the last 18 months. We don't expect that to subside very quickly. The next largest source of general revenue in the coming biennium will be the oil production tax at nearly $13.3 billion, followed by motor vehicle sales and rental taxes at $12.7 billion. The franchise tax will bring in a total $12.6 billion, but just $8.8 billion will be going to general revenue, and the rest will go to the Property Tax Relief Fund under the system set up when the current franchise tax was created. Natural gas production taxes will yield an estimated $8.6 billion. I would caution that severance taxes are notably volatile. I expect that volatility to continue as energy markets continue to grapple with supply chain issues, global geopolitical uncertainty, and policies that have discouraged investment in domestic energy exploration and production. This constant volatility is one reason lawmakers used a portion of this revenue to create the rainy day fund, lessening the reliance on this money to support day-to-day expenses. The rainy day fund was created through a constitutional amendment approved by Texas voters in 1988 after a drop in oil prices and a recession had forced a tax increase. As our state savings account, the fund can be tapped with a supermajority vote of the legislature, whether to help in economic downturns or for other purposes. In addition to severance tax transfers, 1/2 of any unencumbered and unobligated general revenue balances remaining in GR at the end of the biennium must be transferred to the rainy day fund. That does not happen very often, but we are projecting a substantial unencumbered balance at the end of the 2022-23 biennium, resulting in a $5.71 billion transfer due to the rainy day fund early in fiscal 2024. As a result of the unencumbered balance transfer and strong severance tax collections, I'm projecting for the first time that planned transfers to the rainy day fund in fiscal 2025 would push it to the maximum balance, which in each biennium can be no more than 10% of the amount of general revenue deposited during the previous biennium. The fund's cap will be an estimated $26.4 billion in the 2024-25 biennium, but regular planned transfers would push the balance to reach nearly $28 billion in fiscal 2025. Planned transfers for fiscal 2026 also would result in the rainy day fund's balance exceeding its limit for that year. That means that about $4.5 billion of severance tax money that would otherwise be set aside for transfers to the rainy day fund instead will remain in general revenue. I must note that if lawmakers take action that eliminate or greatly reduce the amount of unencumbered GR to be transferred to the rainy day fund in fiscal 2024, the ESF may not reach its cap in fiscal 2025. The BRE is not the only thing that determines the amount that lawmakers can or will actually spend. Our state constitution sets limits on spending, including a limit in Article 8, Section 22, that applies to state tax revenues that aren't constitutionally dedicated. The amount appropriated from these funds can't exceed the rate of growth of the state economy unless a majority of the legislature approves. In addition, the 87th legislature limited growth in appropriations of consolidated general revenue to the rate of growth in combined population and inflation, except for tax relief or disaster recovery. Consolidated general revenue appropriations include spending from the General Revenue Fund, General Revenue Dedicated Funds, and general revenue related funds. Exceeding the limit on these funds would require a 3/5 vote of the legislature, saying an emergency requires it. For the 2024-25 biennium, the LBB adopted 12.33% as the growth rate limit for both the long-standing cap on appropriations of revenue not dedicated by the Constitution and the new limit on the growth in consolidated GR appropriations that becomes effective for the 2024-25 biennium. Even with constitutional spending limits and an inflation-influenced new normal, the enormous amount of projected revenue gives the state a remarkable or a truly once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for historical actions this legislative session. As a former lawmaker myself, I know very well that the legislature decides how to use all of the money they have available. Yet I must advise some caution as these decisions are made. Bluntly, don't count on me announcing another big revenue jump in 2 years from now. The revenue increases that we've seen have been in many ways unprecedented, and we cannot reasonably expect a repeat. We are unlikely to have an opportunity like this again. As I said, this budgeting session is truly a once-in-a-lifetime session. As always, the state must be careful in its spending to ensure we don't face ongoing costs when this surplus is a memory. Thoughtful options might include investment in our electrical grid, broadband connectivity, port and water infrastructure, salary adjustments for state employees, our teachers, and nurses, and the development of our skilled trade workforce. Texas must continue to fill the substantial void left by the federal government along our Texas border as people from all over the world continue to pour into our border communities. The federal government's failure is putting tremendous strain on Texas' infrastructure and law enforcement personnel, infringing on the rights of private landowners and depleting state and local resources. And lawmakers should consider meaningful tax reductions to ease the burden of Texans who are grappling with inflation, economic uncertainty, and rising housing costs. Well thought out spending proposals can have positive results without creating demands on general revenue that might be difficult to meet in years to come. As you can see, the projected ending balance that legislators will have at their disposal shatters previous record surpluses. But the amount available for general purpose spending in 2024-25 could be substantially higher if the legislature chooses to substitute some available federal funds for general revenue, as lawmakers did in 2022-23 budget. The BRE already reflects $3.8 billion in general revenue savings carried forward from 2021 due to the use of pandemic-related federal funds. This revenue forecast is more positive than anyone had reason to expect, especially given the vast uncertainty that came with the pandemic, the impacts of Winter Storm Uri, ongoing supply chain disruptions, shifting COVID policies in China, and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But I must warn leaders and lawmakers that this BRE also is subject to substantial uncertainty. High inflation remains very real. It is above the Fed's policy target, and additional interest rate increases appear likely to try to control it. If inflation doesn't slow down significantly, the Fed's action to check it may prompt a much deeper recession than we currently anticipate. Consumer spending will slow as employment drops and as people deplete any savings accumulated during the pandemic. Activity that is sensitive to interest rates, such as construction, will decline from the current levels as the Federal Reserve continues with a tight monetary policy. Beyond our country's borders, global recession could decrease the demand for oil, driving it below the break-even point for many Texas producers. On the other hand, oil prices could surge again, assuming there is more demand as China drops its COVID restrictions and returns to more rapid economic growth, especially with Russian production faltering in the face of sanctions over the Ukraine invasion. This second scenario would be a boon for Texas energy producers, but hurt other business sectors and cause even more inflation. Our economic environment, as ever, is filled with challenges as well as possibilities. I am certain that Texas is more than ready to handle both, but we must be aware of the potential for change and act prudently. I am ready to continue working with lawmakers as they make crucial budgeting decisions, and so are the dedicated, skilled professionals in my office. As always, I pledge to keep leaders, lawmakers, and the public apprised of changing conditions, and I will be quick to update this revenue estimate if warranted. I would be happy to answer any questions at this time.